Hi and welcome to this week's Property Insider video. Today I have a chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson about the latest property data, about the unemployment figures that were a bit of a train wreck this week, what the Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe thinks about the economy's prospects, and are we really going to fall off a cliff in September when the government pulls the rug out from under us, or is there another option moving forward? If you want to keep up to date with what's happening in our property markets, click the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified each time we have a new video, click the little bell icon as well. As we continue to work our way through the health crisis that plagues this country, more and more conversations are turning to the economy. Are we recovering or are we going deeper into trouble? At the same time as businesses are starting to opening, we're getting news of staggering job losses and rising unemployment. Then, of course, there's the concern that at the end of September, the current federal government's deferral schemes, the support packages are going to expire, and the media is telling us we're going to fall off a financial cliff. So how bad are things going to get? Are they going to get worse? Or maybe we're over the worst of it? That's what I'm going to discuss in today's Property Insider video with Australia's leading housing economist, Dr. Andrew Wilson. And we're also going to talk about the latest property market data from My Housing Market, as well as what the Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe thinks is going to happen to our economy. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Now, before we get into the property news headlines, what's happening in our property markets at the moment?
Well, another positive week for property markets generally, Michael. We're continuing to see the revival that's been well underway since the depth of the shutdown. Of course, confidence is rising. We're seeing a number of measures of improved confidence, consumer sentiment surveys. The stock market continues to build a base from its lows of 2 months ago, and generally this has worked its way into the property market. If we look at auction clearance rates last weekend, again, numbers weren't too far away from where they were a year ago. Clearance rates in Melbourne and Sydney hovering around about the 70%, mid-60, 70% mark. We must still take this data with a grain of salt, Michael. A lot of these auctions are online auctions. If we look at the data a little more closely, you can see still very high numbers of withdrawals in both Melbourne and Sydney. In fact, more than 20% of properties withdrawn from sale last weekend in Sydney. That's a very high proportion, and withdrawals are counted as non-sales. So the data is still positive, but we need to be a little circumspect about the actual nature of the methodology at the moment. But nonetheless, the data continues to improve. Listings are up. Clearance rates are quite reasonable. Sales numbers are up. Other correlating evidence, Michael, which is a bit more real-time and reliable, is the National New Listings Index, which I've been running now for a few months. That continues to rise. We've moved past the little bump downwards we had following the Queen's Birthday weekend holiday, so those seasonal effects. We're now certainly continuing to rise. New Listing Index is still below where it was at its March peak, where the index was based. But if you compare it with a year ago, we're actually tracking now 10% higher in terms of newly listed properties compared to the same period last year, Michael. Of course, we must understand some of that is catch-up energy in terms of those sellers that stood on their hands through the shutdown period. But nonetheless, sellers are certainly happy to move into the marketplace. The number of sellers coming into the market is higher than where it was a year ago, another sign of confidence. And when we look at the relationship between the growth in capital city markets in new listings over the last week, we can see Sydney, Melbourne had a big surge following the Queen's Birthday break. When we look at the sales data, Michael, we're also seeing a surge in new sales coming through as well. And I think that's the real sign. The different sign this week has been sales, new sales numbers actually starting to rise. And when we look deeper into the breakdown of the new sales data, Michael, we can see that there's no doubt that auction sales are now rising, and it's that auction sale increase that's increasing overall sales numbers. So overall, Michael, listings are rising, sales are rising. Sydney still appeals as being the strongest of the markets.
Andrew, the labour force data for May was an economic train wreck. Official data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows that unemployment rose to 7.1% in May. But this only covered the first 2 weeks of the month. If you dig deeper into the figures, the real unemployment rate is in fact much higher than that. But Roy Morgan data, which comes out 2 weeks before the Australian Bureau of Statistics figures, showed that maybe things are improving a little bit at the moment. So why are the unemployment figures not telling us the same story as the staggering loss of jobs?
Well, again, we saw the impact of people withdrawing from the workforce, Michael. the real numbers were the number of people that lost their jobs and the number of people that left the workforce was around about half. The May results were around about half those of April. Nonetheless, they were quite significant. We had over 200,000 people lost their jobs in May and around about 120,000 people left the workforce. Of course, those that left the workforce are not counted in the unemployment rate, but if we did add those that have left the workforce since April to the number that are unemployed at the moment, we would get an unemployment rate of around about 12%. But of course, that's assuming that those that have left the workforce don't have other options in terms of income. But as you said, Michael, that data is still in that period of very severe phase of the lockdown. And there's no doubt the trend, although the data is certainly nothing to be terribly pleased about, the trend is certainly improving going forward.
As I said earlier, the data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics was for the last couple of weeks of April and the first couple of weeks of May. But since then, the economy has picked up, businesses are opening, workers are rejoining their employers, and seek.com.au said job ads were up about 40% over the last month, in line with lock-up restrictions having been lifted. Interestingly, the sectors that had the most growth were hospitality and tourism, where job ads were up 138%. Trades and services like hairdressers and beauty salons, they were up 36% over the last month. More jobs advertised. Manufacturing, transport, logistics. Andrew, the media is telling us that at the end of September, when the current deferral schemes and government support packages for Australia expire, we're going to fall off a financial cliff. Remember, to save lives, the government moved quickly to stop the spread of the coronavirus, but it also crushed the economy, so it put into place JobKeeper and JobSeeker and got Australian banks to give thousands of customers up to 6 months deferral of their payments. In other words, interest was still due, but mortgage repayments were put on hold. It gave people breathing room. The big question now is what happens when these schemes run out at the end of September, because it's clear the economic slump won't be over by then. Now, I can't see the government having spent so much time, so much money and effort and publicity building that bridge to get us across to the other side to then allow us to fall off a cliff once we get there. Recently, APRA has been speaking with the banks to see how they can extend the loan schemes, either lending for longer periods of time, extending the length of the mortgage, or continuing interest-only repayments. APRA Chairman Wayne Byers said no one's got any interest in going off the cliff, so we've got to work out how we work through the next phase.
Well, I'm not sure APRA is the right mechanism to be discussing these prospects, but anyway, moving forward, I think, Michael, that the very fact that we have this 6-month window until the financial support ends gives those that are on it an opportunity to plan for that contingency. I think that's what's happening now. We're seeing some quite positive results in the property market from new building initiatives from the government, Michael. My spies tell me that project builders are really up and running and very pleased about all the interest that they're getting and actual new contracts that they're signing from this particular initiative. So there are positives going forward that will offset the negatives of ending the financial support packages. And I think the main thing is that people have this period of time to work out what's going to happen when the financial support period ends. And I think the government also, I think, will be more amenable, given that I think that they can tighten the actual criteria for being eligible for these financial packages, which means they can still support those that really are in need. The initial projections of those that would require this support, Michael, were obviously overblown, and they didn't have to spend as much money as they thought they would. In fact, it was 50% less. So in that sense, they still have some capacity, even though they've stated that this isn't going to be an ongoing support mechanism. But I think that, again, we're maybe hostage to some hysterical headlines, and let's not get ahead of ourselves in terms of the prospects here. It's a good, scary story, but we've had a lot of those over the journey, Michael, and most of them turn out to be fairy floss.
Similarly, the banks said that they're not going to pull the rug either, and they're going to allow people to have longer periods of maybe interest only, or increase their loan terms by another 5 years to lower the payments. So the banks don't want to be mortgagees in possession either.
No, and I'm not quite sure what the logic is that we're going to see a wave of stress sales as a result of the end of the financial support. We've got to understand that in terms of the market's value, prices in Melbourne and Sydney are still below where they were 2 years ago, even though they really have remained quite flat over the coronavirus period. So there's still some value there. Mortgages are quite low. There are some issues, of course. We do have a fragile rental market at the moment, but even that's starting to look a little healthier.
Andrew, recently Governor Philip Lowe said that he was optimistic in the near-term outlook for Australia's economy. He said the shock to Australia's economy was smaller than it feared. Clearly they were worried we were going to have a rougher time than we have. And there was even the leaks about that paper about the Reserve Bank talking about locking up our property markets for a while. Clearly that didn't happen, and it was just one of the many proposals they were looking at. But Governor Lowe is concerned about lower population growth and our concern about maybe not spending as much as we move out of the lockdown.
I'm not sure the Reserve Bank has covered itself in a lot of glory over its insights into the housing market over recent years, but that's another story. But look, it's good news that the Reserve Bank's feeling a little bit more confident. And why shouldn't we be confident? I think our economy reflects the results we've had from the coronavirus, and it is all about confidence to a large degree. And our confidence is certainly a lot higher than where it was a couple of months ago. And we are, as we say quite often on the show here, Michael, in a better position than most to work our way positively out of what's been a really disastrous period in terms of the shutdown over the last 3 months.
Governor Lowe also suggested that interest rates are going to remain low for a long time, but you've been saying that for many years now. And he also said that he's not going to bother with inflation targeting. Remember, in the old days, they were trying to keep inflation in a band of 2 or 3%. That will be worthwhile looking at in a few years' time, but not in the near future.
Well, look, that's an old story, Michael. I mean, low interest rates were here to stay last year, and inflation was a Don Quixote windmill tilting exercise from the Reserve Bank. That macroeconomic theory platform is long dead, and we're into a new world now. Of course, it's been exacerbated by the coronavirus. All bets are off, a real black swan event. But yeah, moving forward now, we will have almost a set interest rate for the longer term. So it's up to other policy settings, not necessarily in terms of the Reserve Bank or monetary policy, but certainly fiscal policy becomes even more important to adjusting our economy back to normal over the next few years. Yes, and as usual, the positive outlooks always in this country remain the most accurate going forward. So we'll talk next week, Michael.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.